Good morning and welcome to episode 125 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm joined as I am each and every Thursday by Mia O'Brien. You can catch her on the show that she co-hosts Helmets and Heels each weekday from 12 to 2 p.m. on 92.5 and 1010 XL, local Jacksonville sports radio. Mia, welcome back to the show. Really excited for what we have in store for today.
As you told me, Gus, when we logged on, this is one you've been waiting for. And what better time to do it after the bombshell of a 9 a.m. news drop yesterday that Gabe Davis was released by the Jacksonville Jaguars?
Yeah, I wish we'd been able to break the news on the show yesterday. And I think technically the news did break while me and Shipley were live on yesterday's show, episode 124, if you guys want to check that out. But yeah, didn't get to it. I think Shipley saw it and he was like, we got to wrap up so I can get to writing. I was completely oblivious. But yeah, we'll talk about Gabe Davis, I guess, maybe once we get to the wide receiver portion. And on episode, I think it was 121, whatever Monday's episode is, I went over just the depth chart in general for the Jaguars. And so you can check that out if you want for more of a general overview. But yeah, today, me and I are doing real projections for, I don't know, do you know, I was asking Shipley this yesterday, Mia, do you know when the initial 53-man roster does come out? Because I've been saying like mid-August-ish before the first preseason game.
It'll be, historically speaking, it used to be like September 1, August 28th. That's when final roster cuts were, or at least that's the deadline. I think it actually got pushed back a week, so it actually might be like August 24th, 25th, something like that. I haven't actually looked at the calendar to see the exact date.
So in August is when the real deal comes out, the Jaguars' initial 53-man roster. So today, me and I are going to go position group by position group and project who will be making the Jaguars' 53-man roster. Of course, they still can make some moves. They cut Gabe Davis yesterday, and they maybe can make some additions. But as of now, we're generally expecting this to pretty much be the roster in Jacksonville. And so unless you have any other general thoughts, Mia, then let's go ahead and start out with the quarterback position.
Yeah, I see Randy and Robert in the chat saying, which of course you can listen to Duval Rundown live on YouTube, X, and then also Gus and my personal X's if you follow us and not 1010, but you should be following 1010. Explaining that yes, it is after the third preseason game. Yes, it is typically the last week of August that the 53-man roster comes to fruition. But ultimately, boys, I think what's going to be fascinating about this roster, and I think that the quote from James Gladstone following the initial wave of pro free agency, when he said, we want to ensure that the young guys can get out on the grass as soon as possible and there's no one standing in their way. I think that's going to be prevalent across the board. We have to remember, and I want to preface this off the top before we get into the position by position. This is a guy who was part of a Los Angeles Rams team that went to the playoffs, and 50% of its roster were either drafted rookies or undrafted free agent rookies. And so because of that, yes, it's really only one cut, as Social just noted. We no longer have the Tim Tebow, we cut 5 players the first week of August cut. That's a good practice, regardless if Tim Tebow's around. Shout out Tim, or whoever it may be. But yes, it'll be later in August. But I think what's going to be interesting, Gus, and we'll get into it a little bit, the philosophical approach of, hey, we got to keep some of these young cats on the practice squad, and maybe we play that into and parlay that into the onboarding process, even just who we call up week to week for games to get a jersey in order to eventually build this roster for years to come.
Absolutely. Yeah, certainly expecting a good handful of undrafted free agents, especially to make the team, but also even if they don't make the initial 53-man roster, as you're saying, Mia, to at least hang out on the practice squad and have the optionality for the Jaguars of being able to bring up different rookies at different times throughout the long 17-game season. And so, yeah, I think there will certainly be a few surprising names that we list here today. Quarterback is not going to be a surprise. Trevor Lawrence will be quarterback 1. Nick Mullins will be quarterback 2 after he was signed as a free agent from Minnesota following new offense coordinator Grant Udinski. Mia, is it safe to assume that the Jaguars will be carrying 2 quarterbacks, or do you think there's a chance that maybe a John Wolford or their undrafted quarterback that they picked up, Seth Hennigan from Memphis, you think it's 2, or do you think there might actually be some fluctuality with the backup at quarterback behind Trevor Lawrence.
I think it's 2, and we can just keep the conversation going. However, I do want to encourage our listeners to check out, and no, I'm not being paid to say this. I truly enjoyed it. John Gruden is doing his quarterback camps, if you may, over on Barstool's YouTube channel. And he actually sat down with Seth Hennigan at USF's campus. They went on the whiteboard. I'm really excited to see this cat this weekend at rookie minicamp, Gus, because a 4-year starter. They are an above average group of 5 school, certainly in an American Athletic Conference that, while it's evolved during Seth Hennigan's time in college, the fact that he came in as a true freshman, lightly recruited, wins the job, and never relinquished it, never transferred either. I'm really excited to get to know this cat. And I do think that he's the one who he'll make the practice squad. You're going to keep a quarterback on the practice squad. That's where that flexibility comes in. The third emergency quarterback rule. You bring him up to the active roster in case you need to. You sign him, what have you. It'll be 2 quarterbacks, and it'll be Nick Mullins and Trevor Lawrence, but I really am intrigued by Seth Hennigan. Nothing against John Wolford, who's a great Jacksonville native, and I've enjoyed my conversations with him over the years. But I think that Hennigan's a very fascinating fit, knowing that Liam Cohen obviously played the position in college. And additionally, Liam Cohen, James Gladstone are the sons of coaches, and so is Seth Hennigan.
Yeah, definitely a name to watch throughout the offseason. But as you said, especially this weekend at rookie minicamp, I believe the dates are the May 9th through the 11th. But on the 10th, the Jaguars rookie minicamp will be open not only to us, the media, but also to the public. And so a pretty cool opportunity to go, obviously, see Travis Hunter, the 2nd overall pick, but a good amount of rookies and undrafted guys, including Seth Hennigan. So moving on to running back, right now there's 6 players technically on the roster at running back. You got Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, 4th-round rookie, Baishul Tootin. Is Baishul Tootin, am I pronouncing that right? Because I'm not.
Baishul Tootin.
Baishul Tootin. Okay, thank you.
Baishul Tootin and LaKint Allen.
LaKint Allen. And then they've also got day 3 pick from last year, Keelan Robinson, as well as undrafted rookie Jaquindon Jackson. So, Mia, how many positions do you think will be filled? I think last year, off the top of my head, I feel like the Jags carried 3 running backs in their initial 53. It was Etienne, Bigsby, and then Dearness Johnson. Or I guess Keelan Robinson also made the team, so that's 4. So 4 again this year, perhaps? Is Keelan Robinson kind of on the outside looking in, you think?
Keelan Robinson was, I believe, he was on the initial 53. Then they moved him to the reserve injured list. They've changed the rules in the NFL. So now you can place players on IR during training camp, and they are retroactive to return in 4 or 5 weeks. You don't have to play the weird, let's cut Blake Hance, but tell him to sit there on the sidelines, and then we're going to bring him on back in a day's time after we move Keelan to IR. That's not happening anymore, which I think is good practice for the National Football League. I have 4 running backs listed on my notebook. However, I do have an asterisk. The notebook is back. The notebook is back, folks. I do have an asterisk next to one name, and I think you have an idea who that name is, and certainly it's already been referenced in the chat. Travis Etienne I have on the roster with the asterisk until, of course, if he is eventually traded in a contract year, playing on the 5th-year option this year. I think philosophically, Liam Cohen wants to begin the season with Travis Etienne on the roster. They want as many resources as possible as they look to rebuild this running game. And I'd like to believe that they still think Travis Etienne has something not only left in the tank, but his best years could still be ahead of him, albeit at a position where your prime is so much shorter than other positions on a football field traditionally. Tank Bigsby, Baishul Tootin, LaKint Allen, for me, are the first 4 running backs if this 53-man roster was to be built today on May 8th. Again, there's an asterisk next to Etienne because if Tootin balls out in the preseason, if Allen proves that he can be a capable 3rd down back and can also come in and perhaps spell Tank Bigsby on 1st and 2nd down in between the tackles, and if Keelan Robinson takes 2 or 3 back to the house in punt and kick return duty, and he's also a core 4 special teamer for Keith Farwell and also proves a capable gunner, all of a sudden, then you're saying maybe we have some flexibility if we get an offer for a 4th-round pick. I would not give Travis Etienne away at this juncture for anything less than a 4th-round pick. We get to the trade deadline, maybe that's a little bit more flexible. But for me, the 4th round pick is the lowest I would go if he was to be on the trade block right now. What say you?
So yeah, no, I agree. I forget who it was. I think it was Hayes that I was talking about on a somewhat recent show. That like we're on the same boat where I like it doesn't really make a ton of sense for the Jaguars to trade ETN right now unless they are able to get away with like a 4th round pick or something. That would be a little bit more than I would expect, honestly. But like both from the point that you made in terms of like you got to wait and see a little bit whether Tootin and Allen can really contribute right away, and then if they can, and Kalen Robinson is making an impact too, even if it's on special teams, then you feel more comfortable giving away what's been your top running back since James Robinson went down via injury a couple of years ago. But then also it depends on like other teams. Like right now, Dallas seems to have a whole lot running back, but they drafted a guy. They signed Javonte Williams. I don't think they necessarily need to trade for a running back. And now that both free agency and the draft have passed, I think all the other 31 teams in the league are like relatively or just somewhat comfortable with their current running back room. But obviously injuries can happen, surprise cuts and trades can happen. And so maybe I think it's definitely more likely that a team in the league will be more interested in ETN services in a few months' time as opposed to right now.
But to answer your original question, yes, I think Keelan Robinson is on the outside looking in right now. I
Yeah.
know there's been some love for Jaquindon Jackson in the chat and certainly on the streets and in our listening audience on 1010XL on the terrestrial side. I will tell you from watching him during his time at Utah, I think he's a good football player. Injuries, health availability has been the biggest thing that has plagued his career up to this point. And that's where, again, I'm curious to see how it plays out in his first training camp with an NFL franchise.
Absolutely. All right. So we're projecting Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, Bashal Tootin, and LaKent Allen to be making the Jaguars' initial 53-man roster. Moving on to wide receiver, this is pretty easy at the top. You got Brian Thomas Jr., 2nd overall pick, Travis Hunter, free agent addition, De'Ami Brown, and then 3rd-year slot man / return man, Parker Washington. And then after that, I mean, now that Gabe Davis has been released, it's just those 4 players on the current roster right now, besides a handful of, Josh Cephas, undrafted free agent from last year, is still hanging around. You've got a decent amount of undrafted free agent names that I'm sure we'll get to in terms of guys that can potentially fill out the roster. Austin Trammell, kind of a preseason / training camp standout from last season, is still hanging around too. And so there's a decent amount of names. But Mia, let's start out with like the Gabe Davis news. Were you surprised that the cut came? And I guess more so, were you surprised that the cut came at this point in the offseason as opposed to earlier on? And then after that, like how do you expect the Jaguars to fill that vacancy?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. I was more so surprised, Gus, that the Jaguars continue to be bold, and maybe I shouldn't be at this point, that they were so willing to basically eat the dead money and say it's okay. We're going to spread it out over 2 years. I did confirm that last night. So it's a $5.7 million dead cap number in 2025, and then it'll be the fit 14.8, whatever it is,
Yeah.
in 2026. And that's a very sizable number, but the Jaguars will save about $2.6 million because Gabe was going to be due $17 million in 2026. In my opinion, despite it being such a massive dead money number, it ends up actually being a pretty much of a win-win for the Jaguars, because ultimately this is a player who in your ecosystem was going to be wide receiver 5. You need wide receiver 5 to have special teams ability and help you in multiple phases of the game. And Gabe Davis doesn't do that at this point in his career. And you couple that to our point about Jaquindon Jackson and this idea of the best ability is availability. Thank you, Doug Marone. We're still quoting you here in the year of our Lord 2025 in Jacksonville. And so you couple Gabe Davis coming to Jacksonville with injuries, being healthy for 5 minutes, then succumbing to another injury. I know he battled through it. I know Mitch Morse put a tweet out there. But ultimately, this is a move that was done, A, because of the structure of the wide receiver room, and B, this idea, once again, what did we lead off with, Gus, for today's pod? We led off with James Gladstone's comment of, we don't want anyone standing in the way of these young guys who we want to get on the grass right away. And so it's not a surprise to me. And I think it's a great opportunity. As I saw Robert noted and a couple others, I do think Joshua Cephas is in the mix. And it's beyond the fact that he's been a fan favorite for a year now. been hearing rumblings out of that building for a couple weeks, couple months now, and I didn't know whether to really buy it or not. But in light of the news yesterday, certainly the door is open for him, that he is a guy who could turn some heads. I've heard the same thing about Parker Washington, someone who I've been effusive. I want it on the record. Got some people in my mentions in some camps who argue that I'm dismissing Parker Washington. I am not. I was the one who did the one-on-one with him when he said, yeah, I told Chad Hall I want to flex outside. Can he give me the opportunity to do that during training camp? He does. And then we fast forward to November, and he's having to play the X receiver for Mac Jones because it's literally him, BTJ, and nobody else left on the depth chart within that wide receiver room. And so I do think Parker Washington is absolutely in that 1 through 4. Obviously, he's probably the 3 or the 4. He's in that camp. I think Joshua Cephas is absolutely in the conversation for that 5-6 spot if the Jaguars are to keep 6 wide receivers like I currently have on the roster. I would also say, to your point about Austin Trammell, and I saw his name pop up in the comments as well live on YouTube, I think that Trammell's interesting because of his Rams ties, because he was with the Los Angeles Rams and James Gladstone prior to coming to Jacksonville. However, ultimately, aren't he and Parker Washington giving you a similar skill set? And if you're counting on Parker Washington to be a returner for you, then that's filling that 4th position that, again, has to provide special teams value. And so I think Trammell ends up being a practice squad candidate. The 6th, if they are to keep a wide receiver spot, I'm going to throw it to you, Gus, because I'm curious what names pop off the page for you amongst maybe these undrafted free agent rookies or even some of these second-year guys.
Yeah, Eli Pancol from Duke,
Mhm.
Pancol.
We listened to it this morning to confirm, but a couple broadcasters had different ways of pronouncing it. Tessitore says Pancol, so we're going to go with what Tess says.
Yeah, he definitely stands out to me just as a guy that has some traits, and I think that he was productive at Duke. He was just I'm trying to pull up this article from my guy Cy at Big Cat Country because he listed Pancol as or Pancol, that's right.
Pancol. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so he's got a 4.33 40-yard dash time, which I believe off the top of my head is the same that Brian Thomas Jr. ran last year. And he did miss some time due to injuries. But I don't know. He's just like a speedy guy with some decent size that could make sense as just like a high upside guy to fill out the room. But then I think kind of like a lower ceiling but higher floor guy would be Chandler Brayboy, which I forget which college he went to, but I think he was like the special teams player of the year from the conference that he comes from. And so I think that makes a little bit more sense if you are going to add a 6th receiver to the room. But I don't know even if they are going to add a 6th receiver to the room, because I think that before Gabe Davis was cut, like the projection was that they would just carry 5. It was kind of the common assumption at least. But I still think even with a veteran and Gabe Davis out of the mix, they still could only keep 5. Brian Thomas, Travis Hunter, De'Ami Brown, Parker Washington, and then I'm a fan of Josh Cephas for sure. I was certainly buying the hype. I had some how do you say it, like irresponsible takes last year about Josh Cephas. I think I was expecting him to be like one of the best undrafted free agents in franchise history, which is kind of a little bit ludicrous, but especially considering how great Allen Hurns was as an undrafted free agent contributor for the Jaguars and at the wide receiver position. And so, yeah, I'm certainly rooting for Cephas to make the team as the 5th guy, I think, just based on what I saw in person from him during training camp last year. He did fizzle out a little bit during the preseason, but yeah, I'm glad to hear that you're hearing good things about him, because I think that he would make a lot of sense to fill out that room. And then, as we were saying earlier, like these undrafted free agents, even if they don't make the team, like chances are you're going to stash a decent amount of them on the practice squad, and so they'd be able to come up. I think your note about Austin Trammell is right on the money, where like he seems like a practice squad guy, but if anything happened to Parker Washington, I think you could see him elevated to basically replace what Washington gives you.
So a couple things. Number one, I think with Josh Cephas, the reason that for me he's wide receiver 5 right now, because he's been in the building for a year. He's got more pelts on the wall, even if it's just preseason nods from Gus Logue and Mia O'Brien. But also the idea of he's been in an NFL facility for a year. Additionally, he can play all 3 wide receiver spots. And I think that value is going to be valued. I would argue the area that he needs to grow in the most to secure a spot on the 53-man roster, and we saw this in the latter part of training camp last year, is special teams value. And so that's where I think his game is going to have to grow there if he's to make the 53. A couple other
Totally.
names I'll throw out there, whether this is for that 5th spot or if they do keep 6 wide receivers. David White, yes, the local product who the previous regime was very high on before his, I believe it was an ACL tear in mid-June last year. He's in the building. I haven't heard anything specific about him, but certainly a guy who's been in the mix. Be curious to see how he comes back off of injury. I did see some votes of confidence in the chat for Dorian Singer out of Utah, technically, but he actually played on multiple, or not Dorian Singer. Dorian Singer, no. So Darius Lassiter and then Dorian Singer. Those are the two late signings. Dorian Singer, though, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to double check because now I'm confused which one is which. Yes. Dorian Singer started his career at Arizona, 2 seasons, including a 1,000-yard season his sophomore season. Transfers to USC, another 1,000-yard campaign, then goes to Utah. There's no quarterback and all but kind of fizzles off of draft radar. And he's an interesting one for me for sure because of the production that was there while he was in college. I think that Pancol is another great call, especially because of that speed. We've seen, if only in how they've drafted so far, that this regime values speed and doesn't just say it like Urban Meyer did. And I think that makes an interesting case for the Duke product too.
Absolutely. Before we move on to our next position group, I wanted to ask you about like the special teams unit. Obviously, Cam Little will be the kicker. Logan Cook will be the punter. Ross Matisic will be the special teamer, the long snapper. But at kick returner, so like I don't think we need to spend too much time on special teams except for at returner. My assumption right now is that Parker Washington will be the main returner, both in the punt game and the kick return game. But is that your assumption as well, or do you think? I think Parker Washington is especially good at being a punt returner. So I wonder if there will be like a little bit of a camp battle at kick returner. But what are your thoughts on the returner position for the Jags in 2025?
Yeah, I would think so much of it, Gus, will depend on that running back room and how it shakes out. Because if Travis Etienne is still here, certainly that probably means Keelan Robinson's on the outside looking in. But at the same time, Bashal Tutin returned kicks in his college career. And so maybe he's a candidate. Tank Bigsby did return kicks at different points last year, and we talked about it. He looked like he looked like a guy shot out of a cannon on kick return duty. Now, if he's your lead tailback, do you really want to give him that opportunity and not give him a breather? That's a conversation that would need to be had. And that's why by drafting Travis Hunter and all but assuring that Parker Washington is not in the top 3 in that wide receiver room, now you open up the door for him to be more of a regular returner.
That makes total sense. All right, let's move on to tight end. I think this is a pretty clear-cut position group. You got Bretton Strange, the third-year pro, at the top of the depth chart. Both James Gladstone and Liam Combs have talked him up a little bit this offseason. And then after that, there's the 2 free agent additions, Johnny Munt from Minnesota and Hunter Long from the Rams. Hunter Long seems to be a James Gladstone guy, and then Johnny Munt kind of obviously a Grant Udinski guy from their time together with the Vikings. And then also kind of rounding out the group on the current roster right now is Sean Bowman, Patrick Murtaugh, and then undrafted free agents are Patrick Herbert, Justin Herbert's younger brother, who also attended Oregon, and then John Copenhaver. So, Mia, do you think it's as clear-cut as I do, like just the top 3 are making the team between Strange, Munt, and Hunter Long?
Top 3 make the team, and then you keep 2 on the practice squad. Murtaugh, of course, is an interesting one. He suffered that gruesome leg injury at training camp last year, right in front of the crowd at the Miller Electric Center. He obviously is coming back from that injury, but the measurables and the skill set are pretty tantalizing.
Yeah.
You would, if you're the Jaguars, you will have an international pathway program exemption. Do you use that on Murtaugh? Do you use it on Luis Riz-Ahmed, who can play wide receiver, can play running back, can play kick returner? But I would argue Murtaugh is probably further along in his football development. I think that's going to be an interesting case scenario because it opens up the door for the Jaguars to have a 17-person practice squad. But if, like we're alluding to, and certainly when we get to the defensive side of the ball, if you are basically onboarding and gardening, we'll call it, your young next wave of talent who you could potentially call up on game day on the practice squad, do you want those 2 guys to take up 2 of those 17 spots on the practice squad? That's going to be a conversation that will be interesting down the home stretch.
Absolutely. Let's move on to offensive line. Let's just do this unit as a whole. You got the projected starters are going to be Walker Little, Ezra Cleveland for now, Robert Hainsey, Patrick McCarry, and Anton Harrison going from left to right across the starters. And then they also drafted Wyatt Milam in the 3rd round. Luke Fortner is still hanging out. Cole Van Lannon is still there. And then 2 swing tackles that were signed in free agency, Fred Johnson and Chuma Edoga. And then there's Jonah Monheim, forgot to mention, also as another draft pick. Sal Wormley is a pretty interesting undrafted free agent, I think. And then Dennis Daly and Cooper Hodges are still there too, and Javon Foster. And so it's pretty crowded room right now in terms of the full offensive line. There are 15 total names. And so, like how many names do you expect to make the initial 53-man roster? I think for most teams, it's usually about 9, where you've got 5 starters and then somewhere between 3 and 5 backups.
Okay. Are you ready for the hot takes?
Yeah, bring it to me.
Here we go. This is who I got. I got them keeping 10, which means the 10th guy would be inactive. I'll spoil that one. That 10th player who's basically in the incubator is Jonah Monheim. They drafted him, which says to me he's going to make the 53, even if he's a healthy scratch each week.
Yep.
So he's your 10th. Walker Little is your starting left tackle. We are a Walker Little podcast here on Duval Rundown. Myself and Gus Logue, big things coming for Walker in year 5. His first full season to actually play the position that he was not only an all-conference and all-American at Stanford, but was also the number 1 recruit in the country. So Walker Little will be your left tackle. I'm done with the slander. I have Ezra Cleveland making the initial 53-man roster, being on this team, whether it be because of injury, whether it be because Wyatt Milam is pushing him. I have him being traded at the deadline. I do have the Jaguars starting week 1 with Ezra Cleveland as their left guard. Robert Hainsey is your center. Patrick McCarry is your right guard. Anton Harrison is your right tackle. I would emphasize, just like I have on 1010XL and as I have on this podcast, for everyone who wants to write Walker Little off, I would argue it's a bigger prove-it year for Anton Harrison than it is Walker Little. And that needs to be stated. That's not even just from people inside the Miller Electric Center. I'm getting that from people outside in other buildings who are hearing it from people inside of the Miller Electric Center. So file that one away. I believe Anton's going to rise to the occasion. He's still 23 years old. People forget he had just turned 21 when he was drafted in 2023. I think that this is the staff that gets him on the right path. Wyatt Milam, 6th offensive lineman.
Yep.
Chuma Edoga, because he offers you guard tackle versatility, number 7. Cole Van Lannon, same thing, was one of the most productive players in the preseason a year ago for the Jaguars, and obviously had some interest from some other suitors, but comes back to the Jaguars for a 3rd season. This is where I'm about to throw everyone at 1010 under the bus. Sorry. Fred Johnson, love the video from last week that the Jaguar social channel put out. Love a fellow, like local guy, Gator, Florida boy. Think he's hilarious. Thought he did some great things for the Eagles, by the way, against the Jaguars when he was thrown into spot duty. He signed a $1.4 million contract, Gus. This notion of he's going to usurp one of the tackles and he's going to be the starter for the next 3 to 4 years. I have no idea where that's coming from, aside from Pete Prisco forgot Walker Little's name once, and everyone decided that was intel. I don't have Fred Johnson making the team. I don't think it's a guarantee that he has to make the team at $1.6 million. This is a team that's about to eat $17 million, $5.7 million this year, and then another 14 or whatever, not 14. I forgot the number now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're about to eat double 8 figures, right? Yes. 8 figures with regards to Gabe Davis in 2026. They don't care about the money. No Fred Johnson. Instead, Sal Wormley, if he can prove it.
Yes, there we go.
Because he's a mauler. He's exactly what I believe Tony Baselli and James Gladstone want. And if for some reason he doesn't live up to expectations, then it would be Luke Fortner. Otherwise, I think you put Luke Fortner on the Tyler Shatley plan and you keep him on the practice squad. Cooper Hodges goes on IR pup list for the entire year. He gets healthy. He gets stronger, because I do believe there is a world where he eventually could become an interior offensive line depth piece, or even potentially the starting center if Jonah Monheim, if that project doesn't work out.
Here's a little just blurb from Ryan Fowler of the Draft Network on Wormley, for anyone who might not be familiar. Saw Wormley is a vertical mover with the explosiveness to quickly work into the chest of opposing linemen. In time, refining his technique in both phases should see him challenge for rotational snaps, along a front five. And so really great anchor, really great physicality. So obviously something that the Jaguars are looking for kind of across the roster, but especially on the offensive line. And so again, if you just can improve like facing kind of counters and facing honestly like the athleticism that is evident in the NFL, like he needs some time to develop, obviously, but I think he's certainly an interesting project. And so I like that shout of actually having him making the initial 53-man roster, even if Jonah Monheim is kind of like a healthy scratch and Cooper Hodges is kind of kept in the reserves. And so I like that a lot. I don't think I can say anything bad about Fred Johnson because I heard recently they actually moved into my building, and so he's my neighbor. So that's my guy, and he's a Gator.
No way.
so now I'm gonna be pro Fred Johnson, but that said, I don't necessarily disagree with anything that you said there. We're already 30 minutes in.
I love the video. I love the vibes. And I thought he did great things in Stoutland Academy up there in Philadelphia. But ultimately, like this notion of, well, he's going to make the team and he's going to usurp Anton or Walker Little. I have no idea where this is coming from.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, which I'm glad I haven't because that's
some of our colleagues, Gus. That's all.
Oh God. All right. Well, I bet I can guess who. Anyway, let's move on to the defensive line. Specifically, do you want to do defensive line as a whole, or should we do defensive tackle and edge?
So I have edge and defensive line separate, but we could do it all together at once.
Okay. So edge, let's start out there. You got Josh Hines Allen, obviously, Trayvon Walker, obviously. Emmanuel Ogbah was just signed pretty much 24 hours after the draft, going into his 10th NFL season. He spent the past 5 years in Miami. So those are kind of like your clear-cut top 3 edge rushers. But Mia, I'm interested to see what you have after that, because I guess Jalen McLeod makes a lot of sense to be the 4th guy in that rotation as a 6th-round pick draft. But then they've also got last year's 7th-round pick, Miles Cole, still hanging around. And then Yasir Abdullah, who was he last year's 5th-round pick?
2023.
Okay, yeah, 2 years ago. That's what I thought. And so, yeah, we've got a kind of a clear-cut, like a very clear-cut top 2, and I think a pretty clear top 3 as well with the veterans that are on the team. But how do you expect like kind of the bottom of the edge depth to shake out for the initial 53?
Yeah, I have Jalen McLeod as the 4th edge, Gus, but I have it with little arrows because you could also just say there's 3 edges and there's 6 linebackers. He's going to play that off-ball linebacker where maybe you line him up at the buck like he did at Auburn. He can rush over the A-gap. Whether it's him or Yasir Abdullah, I think the reality of this is an undersized edge rusher. Line him up at a wide 9 where he had success in college, which the Jaguars have not done the last 2 years with the former Louisville product in Abdullah. Whichever one of them it is, which I believe it'll be McLeod just because that's who this regime drafted. Please actually move him around. Please, I'm begging. None of this like, oh yeah, we'll just run him over the A-gap at 260 pounds. Like that's not actually productive. And I think that if you ultimately want this chess piece, use them as a chess piece. I also think, and we'll get to linebacker here in just a second, Devin Lloyd and how he is employed. Certainly he's a Sam linebacker, but could you play him at this buck spot depending on how Anthony Campanelli's defense is actually, if only schematically written out? I'm very curious to see if you also use him as an edge rusher or bring pressure up the middle through the A-gap with him too. It's going to be fascinating to see. But yes, for numbers' sake of this exercise, I have McLeod as the 4th edge rusher.
Now, do you have Miles Cole on your defensive line? Or do you have him not making the team? Because I feel like I've seen Miles Cole maybe in the comments more than any other name right now. We've gotten a ton of comments, so appreciate you guys. Keep them coming. But yeah, what do you think about Miles Cole specifically, Mia?
Yeah, I just don't have him making the team, quite frankly, because I do think while Jalen McLeod is, again, he's kind of a curveball because he played that buck spot, so he's not a traditional edge rusher. I still feel like he has a more nuanced palette of pass rush moves compared to Miles Cole. And maybe Miles Cole picked up a move or 2 in the offseason. But from what I was hearing from people who were here last year, when they got him in the building, like it was as raw as a ball of clay as you will see. Great guy, competitive, but he's just out here bull rushing and there's not much else there. So maybe he's developed in an NFL locker room and an NFL offseason. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of people who were like, hey, I know it's a 7th round flyer, but to then trot him out week 1 as an active player on the 48-man active roster against the Miami Dolphins week 1, not a lot of people saw that coming.
Yeah, I feel like he has got a decent amount of fans because he did fairly well in the preseason last year as a rookie, and especially in run defense. But like, it was the preseason, and I feel like he was especially doing well in like the second and the third games, and like the games where there's like less and less starters and less like real NFL players essentially. And so, yeah, that doesn't necessarily surprise me, but to continue.
One other shout in the chat, Social brought up Ethan Downs out of Oklahoma. Remember the name? I
Yeah.
agree. Undersized guy, plays with a ton of effort. Hair is on fire. He's the name who, when we did our pick the fit here on Duval Rundown with the edge rushers, I actually had him written down and I didn't say it. And now I look like a moron because I would have loved to have clipped that. I literally went back and listened to the episode too, just to do that. I also would invite Danny Strigow into the conversation. He became a fan favorite at the Senior Bowl after he was given a phone call Wednesday night and asked if he wanted to come down for one day of Senior Bowl practice and then play in the game on Saturday. And he said, hop me on the plane. I'm ready to go. And that's exactly what he did. And so another intangibly rich guy, another undersized edge rusher in that 260, 270 range. I think he plays with a pretty firm base. I think he could set an edge, pretty rugged run defender too. But again, a little bit undersized. It really depends schematically what this team is looking to accomplish. And if they do like this idea of a fastball off the edge via an off-ball linebacker like a Jalen McLeod, Yasir Abdullah.
Yeah, definitely nice having different archetypes getting after opposing quarterbacks. For the defensive line, we got Devon Hamilton, long time I say, but like 4 or 5 year, going into his 4th or 5th year.
One of the longer tenured Jaguars.
One of the longer, yeah, that's fair to say. Nose tackle, Mason Smith, 2nd year pro. I think he's fairly considered one of the biggest winners of the offseason, considering the lack of resources the Jaguars put into their defensive tackle room specifically. Eric Armstead, of course, is still out there, the 2024 Walter Payton Man of the Year. Jordan Jefferson, another LSU rookie from last year, is still there as kind of like the backup to Devon Hamilton at nose tackle. And then after those guys, it's Tyler Lacey is still there, and then just a handful of undrafted free agents. And so how many guys do you think will make the 53 from this position group at defensive tackle, Mia?
Yeah, so I have 5 with an asterisk.
Okay.
Are you ready? Are you sitting down?
Yeah, I've got a guess for what's going to be, but yeah, lay it on me.
Eric Armstead's on the team because, yes, you got out from underneath Gabe Davis's contract, but I don't think he can get out from that one. Although it would be hilarious if the Jaguars now twice in a 6-year span cut or traded the Walter Payton Man of the Year. I would be here for that content. It would just be hilarious. And I love Calais Campbell. But it would just be like only the Jaguars would do that. Yeah. I have Eric Armstead on this team. I have Devon Hamilton with an asterisk. I think that this is probably the last year. Now, because the Jaguars did not draft any defensive tackles, and I know they are high on Mason Smith and Jordan Jefferson, who I also do have on this 53-man roster, I am curious to see what his health looks like. Look, the situation with the spinal abscess, no one could have predicted it. Devon Hamilton looked like he was emerging at the end of 2022. This idea of him being a run-stuffing nose tackle, but then actually able to give you some push inside the pocket from a pass rushing standpoint, or at least to open things up for Josh Hines Allen and Trayvon Walker. It's certainly it can be a reality once again, but this is, again, an administration that values pass rushing and affecting the quarterback, and they value speed. They are not going to keep a linebacker on the field who is just a traditional 270-pound run thumper, right? And I think the same can be said for the nose tackle position too. And so with Devon Hamilton, again, I love Devon. D-Ham's a great dude. Great guy in the locker room too. I do just want to note though, according to Over the Cap, if you were to cut him pre-June 1, that's a $15 million dead cap number. You wouldn't save any money. If you were to designate him as a post-June 1 cut, you would incur a 6.5 dead money number, but you would save $4.3 million. So just throw that out there. That That's what the numbers say. I think by the actions that they took in the NFL draft, I think he's here for one more year because I think they
Yeah.
need him and they need that veteran anchor in the middle. But I do just want to put that out there. My fifth defensive lineman, this is where we have some fun. I have undrafted free agent out of North Dakota State, Eli Mostert. Please tell
Hmm.
me, Gus Logue, that you have young Eli on your 53-man roster as well.
Absolutely. I don't have a lot of information about him, frankly, but he's definitely a guy that, like, as soon as the Jaguars' like list of undrafted free agents came out, I was like, okay, like, yeah, Ethan Downs and Eli Mostert are like kind of two of the names that I was like, as well as Jabbar Muhammad, who I'm sure we'll get to. Those three, I think, were the names I was like, okay, I'm gonna be paying attention to these guys and how they're doing throughout training camp in Jacksonville.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, Mostert, FCS All-American at North Dakota State, obviously a perennial powerhouse, had 6 sacks from the defensive tackle spot, 11 and a half tackles for loss in his final season of college. A
Mm.
little bit of a injury plagued / up and down 2022 and 2023 campaign. But you go back to 2021, he had 10 tackles for loss, 7 and a half sacks. This is a guy who can get after it and create not only pressure up the middle, but he can get after the quarterback as well. So I think he's an interesting piece. And while I love Tyler Lacey and I love a lot of those guys who've been around now 2 or 3 years, they were draft picks of the previous regime. These are players that were brought in by James Gladstone.
I'm very interested in your thoughts on linebacker, especially talking about Devin Lloyd and like how he's like more of a sandwich. I don't necessarily disagree with, but I actually think he did play fairly well at middle Mike linebacker last year. And so, do you expect for him to switch back to like weak side or kind of like non-middle linebacker, or like how do you see not just like the depth chart shaking out in the roster, but like where these guys lined up right now on the depth chart or on the current roster? It's Foye Oluokun, Devin Lloyd, Chad Muma, Ventrell Miller, 4th round rookie Jack Kaiser, and then 6th round rookie Jalen McLeod is kind of in between linebacker and edge.
That's the same depth chart that I have as well on my 53-man projection. I believe, and again, this is just I believe Foye Oluokun will return to the Mike linebacker position, if for no other reason. Who else do you want to wear the green dot? Like, it doesn't have to be the Mike linebacker who wears the green dot, but traditionally it is. And there's been no one who has been more vocal and more integral to putting people in the right position at the right time on that field, including coaches, than Foye Oluokun over the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think he returns to his natural position where he led the NFL in tackles for 2 of his 3 seasons here. 3 of the last 4 seasons.
Yep.
So yeah, for me, I think they're going to move him back. I just think that this is a regime that's going to get creative. And I've said that now for 2 regimes and I've been wrong. I would like to hope that Anthony Campanelli gets a little more creative with Devin Lloyd. I think with Devin, you have to go back to his tape and what he did at Utah and why he was a 1st round pick. He was most effective when you said, do this, either go rush the quarterback, stop the running back, create something and run support. Like, you have to tell him one thing. And that's not to say that Devin Lloyd isn't a high IQ player. I think he is. But ultimately, he's the type of guy where if you just tell him, go do this one thing really well on this play, and on the next down, do this one thing really well, that is when you see him most effective in a football game, as opposed to, okay, well, if they drop back, then you got to drop into coverage. But if this happens, then you're going to come up and run support instead. But if this happens, you're actually going to... Don't give him more than one thing to do on a given play. Simplify. And that's where I think he can be effective as a chess piece.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but like at the same time, like linebackers coming out of college, but for the past several years have been like just not great in general because like linebacker play at the college level is so different from at the NFL level. And like because at the college level, it's a lot of like, okay, here's your job, go out and do it. But there's just so much more nuance and you need so much more instincts and so much more awareness and so much more understanding of what the offense is trying to do when you're a linebacker in the NFL. And so it's a true developmental position in the league. And so I think that like Devin has not progressed, like he hasn't completely bloomed, but he's certainly improved over the course of multiple seasons in Jacksonville. And so it does seem like he has one foot out the door because the Jaguars recently did not pick up his 5th year option. So it feels like this is going to be kind of a contract year for him where he's playing for a new contract elsewhere in the 2026. But yeah, I'm I'm intrigued to see like where he lines up, how he's deployed, and like how well he does in those assignments. But I think we're kind of regardless of the Devin Lloyd conversation, it certainly does make sense to move Foye Oluokun back to middle linebacker because I think that he was still a good player playing more weak side linebacker at will last year and is obviously the kind of guy that's willing to do anything for his team and anything that the coaches ask him to do. But I think that you can even hear like when he was asked about it last year, he didn't like come out and say like, yeah, I'd rather play Mike, but like he said it without saying it. And so, yeah, I'm excited for Foye for him to be able to go back to his middle linebacker position. Before we move off of linebackers and get into the secondary, Mia, I'm just curious, like what are your expectations right now for Jack Kaiser, the fourth round rookie out of Notre Dame? Because he seems like obviously like the epitome of what the Jaguars are looking for in terms of intangibly rich on and off the field. Do you think that he's going to like just be brought along slowly as most day 3 rookies are and be like more of a important special teams contributor? Or I guess my question is, do you think there's a realistic path to Jack Kaiser getting playing time on defense as a rookie?
I think there's a chance, but I think the beauty of having 4 linebackers ahead of him is there's a glide path that's already in place. Ultimately, when you look at last year's roster compared to this year's roster, Jack Kaiser is sliding into that Caleb Johnson core 4 special teams role. And if he pushes the other 4, so be it. I believe Chad Muma will be on this roster. He's also in a contract year.
Yeah.
With both Devin Lloyd and Chad Muma potentially moving on next year, you had to bring in somebody to then ascend to that number 3 spot. And then Ventrell Miller will be in a contract year in 2026. And so while, yes, in the moment, many people questioned whether or not this idea of drafting a linebacker in round 4 was wise, that started a run on linebackers in this past April's NFL draft. The move by James Gladstone to select Jack Kaiser, who plenty of scouts around the league agree with him. He doesn't, he checks the box on athleticism, but he is an overachiever in basically everything else when it comes to EQ, IQ, being in the contact balance, this idea of he's never on the ground. So he's going to be a high effort, high character player. I think we all know that. I don't want to throw any more buzzwords at y'all, but I believe he will be a special teams contributor year 1, push those other 4 guys. If you need him to step in, he can. I don't think there's going to be any packages for him per se, but ultimately he steps into potentially a starting role in 2026.
All right, let's move on. We'll wrap up with the secondary. I want to start out with a safety unit and then go to cornerback because I think the safety position or the safety group is like just a cluster, you know what. And so like Caleb Ransaw, you've said the 3rd round rookie out of Tulane, you expect him to like the team said that they're going to be starting him out training and developing as a safety, even though he more so played cornerback, especially nickel cornerback in college. And you've said that like you think he'll push for a starting job pretty quickly. And so that would make Ransaw and probably free agent addition.
Eric Murray.
Thank you. Eric Murray, the 2 starting safeties. But then behind them, you've also got Darnell Savage, who's I think he and Eric Armstead are the only players from last year's free agency class still on the team, which is pretty wild. But Darnell Savage is still there. Antonio Johnson, former day 3 pick, is still there. You got Rayon Lane, the 3rd, 6th round rookie, who is projected to be more of like a special teams ace, but he's certainly a safety, and it'll be interesting to see whether he's able to get playing time on defense just at any point in his rookie contract, really. And then Andrew Wingard and Daniel Thomas, the 2 kind of special teams aces and locker room leaders, are there as well. And then you've also got Cameron Soman Craig from Colorado, who's a former teammate in the secondary, obviously, for Travis Hunter. He seems like certainly an intangibly rich guy, great vocal leader. And so it's a very crowded room here in Jacksonville for the safety position, Mia. How do you see it unfolding for the initial 53-man roster?
So once again, I've got some asterisks and I've got some, if this happens, then maybe this happens. So let's start there. After, yes, I have Eric Murray and Caleb Ransaw as the 2 starting safeties. Eventually, at some point, that is what this team and this administration will want to get to, in my opinion. Darnell Savage or Antonio Johnson, one of the 2 will be traded. I don't know which one, but one of the 2 will be traded. The argument for Savage, this idea of he can play not only safety, but he could certainly play the nickel for you, came here anticipating playing the nickel in the previous under the previous administration. Could you split him outside? Maybe. He is 27, 28 years old. Antonio Johnson just turned 23. Antonio Johnson played more snaps in the slot in college football in 2022 than any other safety in FBS football. And so he can also play multiple spots for you. At the same time, well, yes, there was special teams value for Antonio 2 years ago. Darnell Savage is not going to play special teams for you at this juncture of his career, or at least I wouldn't believe that to be the case. But Darnell Savage is a proven commodity and a veteran vocal leader in that room. I've seen it. I've been in the locker room. He's the old head in that safety room, or at least he was last year, where he says, boys, knock it off. Like, what do you do? Stop talking. Like, just go do this. I think that there's value to that. Antonio Johnson's a young cat who, much like Anton Harrison, big prove it year if he is to make this 53-man roster. So I think one of the two is gone. I'm very curious which one. I do have Rayon Lane making this 53-man roster because, again, he was drafted by the administration. I think he will be he'll probably be a healthy scratch the first few weeks, but as they get his sea legs under him, pun intended, LOL, Navy midshipman, then I believe he will eventually take over Daniel Thomas's role. I do have DT in a contract year and Andrew Dewey Wingard in a contract year making this team for vibes, ultimate culture guys, intangibly rich, great dudes. I feel like that would be... I feel okay in saying this with some of the intel that I have. Like, if you were to cut Dewey Wingard or Daniel Thomas, like, I'm not saying there would be a coup in the locker room, but people would sob. Like, those two guys, for their athletic limitations, mean so much to this group of guys. And I believe while they haven't met this next group of rookies yet, they will mean so much to them that I can't help but feel like, well, yes, it would be an ultimate, like, hey, we're moving on to a new way. I also can't help but feel like they have been so integral to the fabric of this team over the last 5 years. You have to let them play out their contract. So I have the two of them making the team. So just to clarify, I would have 6 safeties. Eric Murray, Caleb Ransaw, either Darnell Savage or Antonio Johnson, Rayon Lane, Dewey Wingard, and Daniel Thomas.
Well, 6 certainly sounds like a lot, but it makes sense to me just because I think that there's going to be probably less names at cornerback, which is probably because there's just maybe less rosterable names or like less names that you're like worried about, I guess, players sobbing over if they leave on one hand, but also as Dell said in the comments a while ago, like Travis Hunter's versatility kind of allows the Jaguars, I think, to be like go a little bit smaller in terms of number of players in their rooms at both cornerback and wide receiver because he can play both. And so at cornerback right now, it's Travis Hunter, it's Tyson Campbell, it's Jordan Lewis, the free agent addition, it's Jarian Jones, last year's 3rd-round rookie, who I think we all were surprised about the amount of resources poured into the secondary just because so many people in Jacksonville, including the two of us, are fans of Jarian Jones. And so those 4 are kind of like the top 4 cornerbacks on the team. Then you've also got Monteric Buster Brown, who played decently well last year after a lot of injuries to the defense. Christian Broswell, last year's rookie DeAndre Prince, and then Jabbar Muhammad, an undrafted free agent from Oregon, who I think a decent amount of people are projecting to make the team. And so what say you, Mia? I think it's a pretty clear-cut first 4 between, again, Hunter, Campbell, Lewis, and Jones. But what are you thinking after that?
The beauty of, we already said Travis Hunter's name once, is that I don't have to put him under the cornerback room. If
True.
only
he only counts as one person, one player.
Yep. And trust me, that is something that is being noted in that building, because now there's one position group that's going to benefit because they're going to be able to keep an extra player because Travis Hunter is already on the roster in the wide receiver room. So definitely want to make that delineation. Gus, you tell me, how many corners do you have besides those 3? Because Travis Hunter we already accounted for. How many other corners do you have?
2 more after that.
Okay, so you have 5 total. So do I.
Yeah.
You go first. Finish it off for us. Who are the final 2 members of your way too early 53-man roster?
I have DeAndre Prince and Jabbar Muhammad, which it may be a little bit hot take-ish because I think there are certainly a lot of fans of Monteric Brown. But again, even though he did do fairly well at like coming in because he had to because of injuries last year to the secondary, I don't know if it was good enough to like make the team over kind of like younger guys that might have a bit of a higher ceiling. I would like to see more DeAndre Prince. I think that he had a pretty solid training camp last year and then like just completely fizzled out in like the preseason. I don't know if he got nicked up from injury or what it was, but I think he had a couple really good showings again during training camp, and then we just didn't really hear from him again. But he's a guy that like is really good speed. He's a little bit undersized, but because of that speed, he's able to stay on the field. And so I'll just be interested in taking more looks at him. And then Jabbar Muhammad, again, the cornerback from Oregon, who I think has a little bit of versatility. I think he's like mostly a nickel, but can play a little bit outside, can even play some at safety. And so obviously the Jaguars love versatility everywhere on their team. But I think in the secondary is one of the bigger spots, considering their commitments to Jordan Lewis and Caleb Ransaw in the offseason. And so, yeah, I've got DeAndre Prince and Jabbar Muhammad, but I'm not necessarily super confident about that.
I also have Jabbar Muhammad, and I think that that's just the camp eyes. And we see a guy who on the national runner-ups 2 years ago had ball production like we've never seen before. You would think by transferring to Dan Lanning and the number 1 ranked Oregon Ducks defense, Dan Lanning's a defensive-minded coach, that would have upped his production. Instead, it did the opposite, despite the fact that he still had double digits in terms of passes defended, by the way, which I think kind of gets like thrown under the radar because the interception number wasn't as high as it was in 2023. So I have him making the roster as well. I have Buster Brown as my final member.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's twofold. Number one, Trey Prince runs better. And I was told that by multiple people outside of this organization during the draft process. He's got 4.3 speed. At the same time, 4.3 speed, press man corner out of Ole Miss, for a scheme that at this juncture, it feels and sounds like they're going to be running predominantly zone. That's not to say that he can't translate to that. But while Buster Brown has athletic limitations, he, number one, has pelts on the wall. And he's got, if nothing else, he's got that tape from the Saints game 2 years ago at the Superdome where he all but wins it for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's better in zone. He played in zone at Arkansas. And he also had ball production at Arkansas with 5 interceptions to lead the SEC his final collegiate season. I ultimately think that if Tyson Campbell was to go down, if Jarian Jones was to go down, and you need an outside corner, well, yes, Trey Prince probably has the higher ceiling. I think that Buster Brown is the more proven commodity. And ultimately, if you're the Jaguars, you need someone who is not only going to just put in the work, but when push comes to shove, he can come in off the bench cold for you and immediately perform.
Yeah, you completely sold me. Let's put Buster Brown on the 53.
Especially Trey Prince. I wish for the best, and
absolutely.
And look, a lot of, and I do want to like put an asterisk on everything we've done today. A lot of my intel, yes, comes from what I'm hearing in the building currently, but some of my opinions have also been formed by people who are no longer at the Miller Electric Center, but what they saw a year ago. That's not to say that some of these young cats can't get it together under a different administration. I hope many of them do.
That makes a lot of sense. Why don't you go ahead and run through the 53-man roster that is on your notepad, because I just kind of have like a image in my head of all the guys that I had, but I'd actually write it down. But I don't think I really disagree with you on anything, especially when you convinced me about Buster Brown being over DeAndre Prince. I think like I wasn't really considering the scheme at all, but when you brought that up, like I definitely agree with you where I'm certainly expecting a much more zone-heavy approach from the Jaguars, especially relative to last year, but even relative to like most of the teams in the NFL. I think the Jags will be pretty zone-heavy in 2025. So I like that a lot. So why don't you run through the full 53 projection that we've got here today?
Yes, sir. We've got 2 quarterbacks in Trevor Lawrence and Nick Mullins. As of now, 4 running backs. As of now, those 4 running backs, Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, Bashal Tootin, and LaKent Allen. 3 tight ends, Bretton Strange, Johnny Munt, Hunter Long. Gus has 5, maybe 6 wide receivers. I have 6. Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter, De'Ami Brown, Parker Washington, Joshua Cephas, David White, undrafted free agent to be named later. Offensive line, we have 10. There's some discrepancy at the bottom. Gus is a Fred Johnson. Gus comes from a Fred Johnson home. I have on my offensive line depth chart Walker Little, Ezra Cleveland, trade deadline candidate, Robert Hainsey, Patrick McCarry, Anton Harrison, Wyatt Milam, Chuma Edoga, Cole Van Lannon, some combination of Sal Wormley or Luke Fortner. Gus has Fred Johnson, and Jonah Monheim as a healthy scratch on game day, with Cooper Hodges being stashed on the PUP list. The defensive side of the ball we go, 4 edge rushers if we are to include Jalen McLeod in that room. Otherwise, you would have 6 linebackers, Josh Hines-Allen, Trayvon Walker, Emmanuel Ogbah, and the 6th-round rookie out of Auburn. Along the defensive line, Eric Armstead, Devon Hamilton, Mason Smith, Jordan Jefferson, Eli Mostert, the undrafted free agent defensive lineman out of North Dakota State. To the linebacker room, Foye Oluokun, Devin Lloyd, Chad Muma, Ventrell Miller, Jack Kaiser. And finally, in the secondary at safety, Eric Murray and Caleb Ransaw as your eventual starting tandem. Dewey Wingard, Daniel Thomas, your special teams culture aces. Rayon Lane, the 6th-round pick out of Navy, another special teams ace. Either Darnell Savage or Antonio Johnson. And finally at corner, Tyson Campbell, Jordan Lewis, Jarian Jones, Jabbar Muhammad, and Buster Brown.
There it is, folks. Don't even have to wait around until August anymore. Mia, we've gone a full hour on the show. I don't have anything else, but I don't know if you have any lingering thoughts or kind of like takeaways after we broke this down. I kind of expected to be like, oh man, this position group could really use like an upgrade, especially I guess a receiver considering the Gabe Davis news. But after going through it, I think the Jags are in a pretty solid spot and don't necessarily like need any additions now at this point, especially with them adding Ogbah at defensive end after the draft. But what say you?
Like I said off the top, James Gladstone, Liam Cohen, Tony Baselli, they want these young guys to get out on the grass. We're excited to see them out on the grass at rookie minicamp on Saturday.
Absolutely. Thank you to Mia, as always, for joining. She'll be back next Thursday. I will be back tomorrow at 9:04 a.m., I believe, with Rick Ballou, the truth teller. I got to confirm that, though, but 9:04 a.m., I'll see you guys then tomorrow morning. Thank you again to Mia. Thank you to all of our watchers, listeners, and especially our commenters. Adios, guys. Have a good